This event is co-sponsored by NJ.com and by the nonpartisan Eagleton Center on the American Governor at Rutgers University in New Brunswick. Both organizations, both NJ.com and Eagleton and Rutgers, in fact, are eager to help present and future voters deepen their familiarity with the candidates on the ballot and deepen their understanding of the issues at stake in this election, which is 6 weeks from yesterday, November 7th. When we asked Ambassador Murphy to participate in this discussion, we extended an identical invitation to Lieutenant Governor Kim Guadagno. Last week, her campaign advised us that her schedule will not permit her to join us. Eagleton and NJ.com have partnered, however, to host a Q&A with the 5 independent candidates running for governor. This will probably be recorded on October 20th. Additional information about it will be on the website nj.com as that date gets closer. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this evening's program, Tom Moran, political columnist and editorial page editor for the Star-Ledger.
Thanks, John. Thanks again for coming, everybody. We have an hour, so I want to jump right in. Before we start, I just want to offer one thought. Phil here is ahead in the polls by an enormous margin, and so I'm assuming his advisors told him, don't come. You're ahead, don't mess with it. And so I think we owe him a special gratitude for being here. It's a show of respect for voters and for the besieged free press, and we're grateful.
Well, thank you very much.
Surprise, if I may also sting Kim Guadagno for not showing up, is that she's way behind it. It's very unusual for a candidate to pass up a free audience like this, ready-made audience, when you're way behind. One might even call it bizarre. So this is being broadcast live on NJ.com's Facebook page here at Eagleton Institute of Politics at Rutgers. We're also live on 88.7 WRSU FM, Rutgers Radio, and WRSU.org online. I'll start it off with the first question. Matt's going to follow that up, then we're going to the students, and we'll ask follows. You, Phil, have proposed $1.3 billion in tax hikes aimed mostly at the wealthy. That, for perspective, is about 1/4 the size of the tax hikes Jim Florio passed. That, you say, will cover the cost of your 3 top priorities: pensions, education funding, and transit. So here's my question. Is it realistic to propose even more new spending programs as you have, whether it's child care or your recent proposal for free tuition at community colleges?
First of all, may I say I'm really honored to be here tonight. This is an invitation we accepted on the wire, as they say. I love coming to Rutgers. I'm here all the time. Eagleton this is my second visit, although the first one in the building proper. I want to thank John for his gracious words of introduction, Ruth Mandel, who runs this institute so well, and good to be with you, Tom and Matt, and all of you here tonight, particularly Rutgers Dems. So the frame, I would suggest to start, Tom, by saying the frame is this is an economy that is weak, unfair, and works for very few. It's an economy under the almost 8 years now of the Christie-Guadagno administration that's favored the big corporations, the very wealthy, at the expense of things like funding public education, funding infrastructure, and the whole set of fairness steps that we think we need to take and should have long ago taken, like minimum wage and earned sick leave, equal pay, et cetera. And by the way, on that list is college affordability. And you're absolutely right. We believe that the programs you listed undoes some of that damage and puts the middle class, I hope that's not me, puts the middle class back at the head of the class where we think they should be and where they've not been over the past 8 years. The extent to which we can achieve some of our other aspirations will depend, frankly, on our ability to grow this economy. So we think of this as a pay-as-you-go idea, pay-as-you-go notion. We're at a very low place right now. So I personally am optimistic that we've got a lot of good growth opportunity ahead of us. We think we can reignite the innovation economy. We can reignite the infrastructure economy, to pick two. The extent to which we can grow, we can then get to the other priorities that we are passionate about. As you mentioned, free community college, which, by the way, is a bargain. That's the steal deal of the century, frankly, $200 million for everybody in the state. That gives you an idea how big the federal government is there. You mentioned universal pre-K. That's more expensive, probably takes more years to phase in. We could go on, but those are two examples that we want to get to as soon as we can. But growth will be a key X factor for both of those.
So worst case scenario, and we don't have the growth you want, those other programs would have to take a back burner.
I think you'd have to sequence them. I think you'd have to prioritize them. A budget of $35 billion, the budget we have today is a set of priorities. They've prioritized big companies ahead of kids. We'll have to look long and hard. We've already said pretty explicitly we're going to find a way to get to free community college. I hope with some growth we can not just do that, but also pre-K for everybody.
Okay, and even though I said I'm going to ask one question, I'm going to ask a third. It's a follow-up, so it doesn't count. They were all one-third questions. So let's say, Phil,
this is new math here, folks.
Right, I make politicians their math add up. My own is all
you don't have to worry about that stuff.
But let's say your new spending and your new taxes balance out, and we're no deeper in the hole than we are now.
Yep.
That doesn't get us out of this hole. It worries, as everybody, many people here know, we have the second worst fiscal crisis in the country.
Yep.
And the portion, one big question I have for you, the portion going to benefits for public workers, pension and health benefits, according to the Governor's Commission, 14% now, growing to 27%.
Yep.
In 2022, that's only 5 years away, which means we couldn't fund transit and education and all the other stuff.
Yep.
So don't you have to come up with something that doesn't just balance, but that more than balances?
Yeah, you've got, Tom brings up, for those of you who have not been looking at the math, but you've been living it, as we all have, this is a state in crisis. There's no other way to put it. So we've been downgraded 11 straight times in this administration. We lead the nation in foreclosed homes. Household income, and this is exceedingly rare in America, since the Christie Guadagno administration took over, is down 5%. There are very few states in America with income that's down. And this is the biggest updraft in household income, I think, in American history. And by the way, not only are incomes down, but expenses. Property taxes are up 17%. NJ transit fares are up 36%. Cost of going to college is up over 20%, on and on and on. So we are in a state of crisis, which is why I believe we need, above all else, a governor who has experience in building and driving sophisticated economies in the 21st century, which is why I mentioned both the innovation and the infrastructure economies. As it relates to public pension obligations, and Tom, you and I met a dozen years ago when I chaired the original commission on this for Governor Cody. We're a state that folks no longer trust. And so I will tell you, we've got to reclaim our space as a state that people trust again at almost any cost. It's not just public sector employees, it's the rating agencies, it's young people who leave the state in droves to go to college outside of New Jersey, or then if they stayed here to go to college, leave it to work for their jobs. So I want to be the state that folks trust again. That means we're going to have to step up and meet our side of the obligation. We've been kicking that can down the road going on 20 years, and it's not been kicked harder or farther than under this administration. And we've got to say, wait a minute, we are a state you can trust again. We're good for our side of the deal. And then I think we can go from there.
1/3 of a question, Matt.
Thank you for letting me ask a question here, Tom. I appreciate this. Yes, and thank you. And I'd like to echo Tom's remarks about thanking you for joining us here. Same on the idea about the same polls that show you leading Kim Guadagno also show over and over again that the number one issue that folks in New Jersey are worried about is property taxes, and rightfully so. So that leads me to a question that a lot of local folks closely associate that to. New Jersey has some of the best paid cops across the United States, with over half making over $100,000 a year. Currently, raises for cops and firefighters are restrained by a 2% cap. We know that this is something that has been received well in the legislature in the past. Local officials, in both parties warn that allowing the cap to expire at the end of the year will result in big tax hikes. The governor has said recently that everything hinges on you, and that legislative leaders have expressed to him that they're waiting on your call. You're the head of the party to come to him. So, the question simply is, where do you stand on this arbitration cap?
You both have mentioned polls. I want to say one thing. The most important part of those polls, to me, are about 40% of the electorate have not made their mind up yet. So with all due respect to your very kind and gracious words about where we stand in the election, with 41 days to go, there's an enormous amount of folks, and maybe some of them in this room tonight, who have not made their mind up, and that's why we're out there morning, noon, and night pounding away. So you've got this 2% cap question. I want to just talk about one other number. And I'll answer your question, Matt. You've got a 2% cap question, but there's another number I want you to also focus on, and that's 50%. What is that? That is on average, and in fact, if anything, I'm light, the percentage of one's property tax bill in this state that goes toward funding public education. So the gorilla in the room, and I want to talk about the 2, is really the 50. Meaning that this administration, the Christie-Guadagno administration, have underfunded the only school funding formula ever blessed by the Supreme Court in the state of New Jersey by over $9 billion. Over $9 billion. And so we've committed, as Tom has noted in his first question, we will fully fund the school funding formula. And we've got the big corporations, the wealthiest among us, hedge funds, a series of loopholes that will close, that will come up with the money in order to do that. That is a game changer in anybody's property tax reality. So that's really, frankly, the big gorilla issue. The 2% question is I don't want to avoid the question. There are good arguments on both sides. And I hear I'm hanging more with Democrats than Republicans, probably not surprisingly. There are good mayors, and we got one of them here tonight at a minimum, and members of council who will say that's been a real help to them managing their budget. And on the other side, I mentioned a few minutes ago, you can't ignore the fact that household incomes are down 5%. Expenses are going up like crazy. There is a report coming out at latest in December. I say at latest because there's some sense it may come out earlier. I want to go back to being the state that we make decisions based on fact and science as it relates to things like climate. I want to see what the report says. And I want to find, we've had an us versus them almost 8 years in New Jersey. We've now got an us versus them president, where you got to be either for that. If you're for that, you're against that. You know what? I reject the premise. I think there's real scope, and this is a good example of it. We can find common ground. So I'm going to wait till the report comes out, see what it says, and figure out with all sides at the table, because that's my MO, to figure that out. But I also want to make sure everybody hears we're going to fully fund public education. That's the game changer as it relates to property taxes. And
just following up with that then, this is one of those small, you talk about us versus them, this is one of those small areas where Democrats and Republicans, especially on the local municipal level, seem to agree. The report is due by the end of the year. If that report comes out before Election Day, would you commit to offering an opinion on where you stand before voters head to the polls?
I get asked about hypotheticals all the time. Let's wait till it comes out. When it comes out, I promise you we're going to get at it immediately. And again, we're going to make a decision based on fact, taking all sides into consideration. And again, we're going to fully fund public education in the state.
Okay, we're going to go to a few.
Was that a third
questions.
of a third of a third? I couldn't.
I can keep on going if you'd like. I can do Moran math all night long.
I'm having trouble following the math here, so just want to.
We have some student questions now. Enrique.
Hi, Ambassador Murphy. Thank you for coming down. I'm Sam Kaplan. I'm a freshman here at Rutgers University.
Where are you from, Sam?
I'm from West Orange. I actually canvassed on your behalf.
I love you, man.
Yeah.
By the way, my youngest son's name is Sam, so you are automatically in the Hall of Fame.
Awesome. I'm Sam number 2.
Listen. I think you're Sam. You're Sam squared.
All right. That works for me. Thank you.
Okay.
So my question is, as a relative newcomer to New Jersey politics, if elected as governor, do you feel confident that you will be able to unite disparate sections of the New Jersey Democratic Party to enact your agenda?
That's a great question. Did you all hear that? As a newcomer, you mean not you, but me. I'm the newcomer, right? Listen, the answer is God willing, and that's what my aim is, to unite and find common ground. I mentioned to Matt's question, we've gotten sort of in this, and I wish the lieutenant governor would have the same chance to answer some of these questions with you. So I share the same passion, Tom, that you did in your opening lines, because I'd love to hear some of her answers to these questions. We are the Democratic Party. that means we're the so-called big tent, Sam, right? So we take all comers, and that's both a badge of honor, and it's also, as my late mother would say, the cross that we bear, because we have lots of things that we see differently from time to time. And again, I mentioned in answer to Matt's question a minute ago, we've gotten used to this us versus them thing, right? You can't respect the Second Amendment and still sign gun safety laws. You can't be for affordable housing and still believe that property values would stay strong. You can't, this business, which I just completely reject. I completely reject it. I believe there's much more that unites us than divides us, even across the aisles between one party and the other, but certainly within our party. And so while I am a newcomer, I served as the United States ambassador to Germany under President Obama. I was the national finance chair for the Democratic National Committee and raised a lot of the money that got President Obama or Senator Obama elected president. So I've been in and around politics, but I've never been a principal before. But one of my sort of main mantras, other than finding common ground, is to try to get the talent that's already on the scene and work with them. In other words, I'm not of the opinion you come in as the smartest guy in the room with all the answers, or you come in with your guys or your team, and you say, wait a minute, we got this figured out. That's usually, if not always, a recipe to fail. So I want to, and one of the benefits, we declared our campaign, and Tom, I think, was the first interview on the day we declared, which was May 16th on the telephone, 2016, and I had been kicking the tires for a couple years before that. One of the benefits of that long runway is I met a lot of people, including some sitting right in here. And that, I think, will allow us to say, you know what, this is a state chock full of talent. This is a party chock full of talent. We've been out of office for going on 8 years. There's an enormous amount of passion to get back in there. And yes, we see things differently depending on the issue. But again, I'm a big believer there's a lot more that unites us than divides us. Is that fair? And I'd say the other problem we have right now, just to say, is our president is doubling down on that us versus them, that division. And we got to push back on that. That's not the way, that's not who we are as Americans or citizens of this state. Sorry.
So you do talk about as bringing in talent and not being the smartest person in the room and being open to that. But Tom and I know that anyone who's covered the State House for a while, that you also have a lot of folks in the State House who have their own agendas and who have, let's just say, very strong muscles and can get things. It can push folks around a little bit. So, and this comes back to something that's been happening recently. We have the New Jersey Education Association, one of the state's largest unions, essentially waging war against the top Democrat in the state. Tom and I have both spoken to folks in the Democratic Party who are upset that you haven't sort of come to the Senate President's defense. Does divisions like that before, if you were to get elected, hamper your ability to cut deals to get your agenda passed later on?
I would just say I'm going to argue a little bit. I'll do it politely with the premise of your question that I haven't come to his defense, which I'll come back to in a second. So here are the facts. It's a great question. First of all, I am a proud public school product. My sister retired not too long ago as a Boston City school educator. She has the thickest Boston accent you've ever heard in your life. Just to warn you, she's going to come down and help campaign for me. I am endorsed by not just NJEA, but AFT and a lot of representatives in this room and in this campus. So not just public education, K through 12, but also higher ed. And I wear that as a badge of honor. At the same time, most definitively, I'm campaigning alongside and for Steve Sweeney to get elected. And I might add, to his credit, he's campaigning alongside to get me elected. So just because we don't see this one the same way, I am without question standing up for him, and I'm standing beside him. We're campaigning together. We do events together. We talk about each other both in front of each other and behind each other's backs, and it's laudable. But we may not, multiple parties may not always see things the same way. They're also not a wholly owned. They're an independent organization. They're not a wholly owned subsidiary of the Democratic Party. They have their own processes and they make their own decisions. I'm honored by their support.
I will say, just for perspective for the audience, that although Phil has not run a government, and that kind of worries a lot of people, including me, He's met everyone in the state. I went out to dinner with him early on, and I was trying to brag about that. It's like, I had dinner with him. Oh, I did too. I had 3 dinners with him. I spent the night at his vacation house. I can't. He has hustled and done his homework. I'll give you that.
Thank you for that, Tom.
This situation worries me for one reason. It is true that you've campaigned with Sweeney. It is also true that you have not said a word against the NJEA's tactics, spending millions of dollars supporting a Trump candidate, and that has infuriated Democrats. And I'm not just talking about South Jersey and Norcross. I'm talking about North Jersey and Central Jersey too. As he knows, there are 16 senators out of the 24 sent an open letter last week saying, hey, the NJEA, which is a pillar of the Democratic Party's lobby, you guys need to back off. And when I called the 16 senators on the list, there was widespread anger that you haven't come out and said to the NJEA. And the NJEA told me, even in private, he hasn't gotten on our case on this.
Well, again, I just repeat what I said a minute ago. They're not a wholly owned subsidiary of the Democratic Party. We've been endorsed by scores of organizations that have their processes. They go through them. This one we don't see the same way. I suspect if we uncovered, there are others that we don't see the same way with other organizations. I feel at peace that I'm supporting Steve, and he's supporting me, and I'm at the same time incredibly honored by the support of the NJEA.
Do you believe this is damaging your relationship with the Democratic legislature?
I don't, actually. I don't. I believe that we'll get through this period, and again, I'm incredibly. It gets back to Sam's question, can you bring disparate pieces together? I'm an optimist. I really believe that. And again, it's partly for reasons that are not terribly constructive or positive, and that is because we're going to inherit a state with an economy that's busted. So we stand for a stronger and fairer economy that works for every New Jersey family. I say that all the time. That's the mirror image of what we've got. Unfortunately, for all the wrong reasons, that's going to unite us because we're going to have to get this state back on its feet and at the same time keep swatting back what's coming at us out of Washington.
Okay, and I'll leave this. I know I'm drilling your teeth a little bit here on this, but why not?
Tom, I love it when you drill my teeth.
Why not say to the NJEA, knock it off, they're supporting a Trump candidate against the leading Democrat, the Senate president? That seems like you as the head of the party, it would be very natural in a lot of legislators for you to say, hey, knock it off. I don't like what you're doing.
Listen, I appreciate that. I see it the way I've already said it. In other words, I'm at peace with that. But I also have this one other pesky fact before me. I have to win an election. You know, people talk about me as being the head of the party. I got to win an election in 41 days. And that's the main event before us, and that's why we're running around the state up and down like, chickens with our heads cut off.
Okay. Second student question, please.
Good evening, Ambassador Murphy, and thank you for coming tonight. My name is Dami Lola Onifade, and I'm from Paterson, New Jersey.
Honored to be with you. I love Paterson.
Great town. My question is, what would you do as governor to help families with the crushing cost of college?
Oh, do you all hear that? What would I do as governor with families with a crushing cost of college? And you all are living it, right? So this is one, we probably could go on for 15 minutes, and I won't do that. This is a good example, and again, I wish the lieutenant governor could get this question as well, because they've been there, she's been there. I'm not. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do when we get there, assuming we do get there. But it's a good example of other priorities have been put ahead of education, not just K through 12, but higher education. And the level playing, the field rather, between the family and you on the one hand and the state on the other hand has gotten completely out of whack. So the burden has increased. Cost of going to college in the state is up just over 20%. Too many kids, by the way, I go to TJ Best's every annual dinner for families with kids coming out of high school in Paterson who are going to go to a 4-year college, and it's one of the coolest things I do. But you know what the sad part is? There are a bunch of kids and families who don't make it to that dinner not because they don't have the grades or the passion or the will, they don't have the money. And I think that's completely unacceptable. So I don't have a one glib answer for you, but let me tell you a few things that we stand for. Number one, free community college. Tom asked me the question. We want to get to that as fast as possible. It might take us a couple of years to phase in. At $200 million, it's the bargain of the century, in my judgment, particularly given where the innovation 21st century economy is headed in that need for what they call middle skills jobs. So these are not PhDs, but folks who have a 14-year education where they're going to be vital players. That's one. Secondly, I'm in love with the idea of a public bank. Okay, so right now when the state raises tax dollars, they send them to New York Wall Street banks, or they put them, invest in commercial paper of places like the Koch brothers, Honest Engine. There's no transparency. My idea is that money, we form a bank that we as citizens own, the People's Bank in New Jersey. It's been done once before in North Dakota, and all of the deposits get lent out in New Jersey only. And one of the great lines of business that we want to pursue is affordable student loans, not these loan shark rates that you're having to deal with, but fair rates for you and your family. Another idea we like, we haven't got this completely machined, but let's assume you've got the following three challenges, and I think we do. Number one, you want to emphasize the innovation or STEM economy, which we do. That's in our gene pool. We ought to dominate that. This administration has let that economy go. We want to reclaim that space. Secondly, we lead the nation in exporting high school seniors to go to college. Thank God you stayed home. And thirdly, college is unaffordable for too many. So here's an idea that we also like. We got to figure out how to machine this. Stay in New Jersey as you head to go to college. Major in a field that we're emphasizing in the state. In this case, I mentioned the STEM or innovation economy. Graduate and get a job in that economy in New Jersey for, say, 5 years. And then in years 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, you've got a fund that forgives X thousands of dollars per year off your outstanding student loans. So you stayed in New Jersey, we love that. You majored in a field that we want to, and worked in a field that we want to emphasize, and you took a huge burden of your student debt off the top. So community college free, public bank, that last idea. We've got some others that we're baking, but we've got to make college accessible and affordable. It's gone too far out of reach during the Christie Guadagno years for too many of our kids and their families. We've got to pull that back.
This idea sounds very appealing to me, and as you recall, I hope I wrote a column saying this is the first big innovative idea of the campaign, the public bank. We keep our money here, we use it for these good purposes. And I got all these calls from people going, the people who I trust going, are you crazy? New Jersey government owning a bank and deciding who gets the loans, you know, and if those loans go sour, taxpayers on the hook.
Yep.
How do you guard against that?
Did you get any calls from the People's Republic of Montclair, as the governor would?
Not on this.
From your backyard?
That was the Christie endorsement that
Exactly.
I mostly got.
This is all kidding aside. So again, this isn't, the concept is, I ran over the idea quickly, is you establish a bank that we own. It's been done in North Dakota, of all places. And it, by definition, the bank has to lend all of its money in New Jersey. And so the three areas that we've talked about are student loans, small businesses, in particularly minority and women-owned small businesses have a very thin access to capital, and small-scale infrastructure. So not the big gateway tunnel, but the small-scale local. Matt Doherty's here from Belmar, a project in Belmar that you're trying to find. You're in the queue in the county, and you can't get, or you have to go sell bonds. You don't want to do that. This is the way to get it. The student loan piece is very easy to administer. North Dakota actually has proven that. The other two pieces, actually, the capital would flow, and I don't want to get too complicated, through community banks. So it would not be opposed to community banks, it would be through them. So there would be a fee that would be charged. So their loan officers would make the decision, their risk committees, et cetera.
All right, so if you or another political player said, hey, we have this great infrastructure project idea and we need funding, you would have zero influence over it.
Zero. This would be independently chartered, independently governed. It would be much more transparent. So good luck, any of you, finding how the state what they currently do with their tax dollars. You almost can't find it. We had several people trying to find it, and it's in a footnote on page I don't know what. This is much more transparent. This is up in lights, and that's a good thing.
So when we're talking about community college and free community college, you just came out with this. Originally, it could be $400 million. I think afterwards, you subsequently, the campaign scaled back what you thought the cost would be.
I made not a Moran, because he gets his math right. I made a Murphy math mistake. It's 200.
Well,
it's 200 million.
It's still, and it goes back to Tom's original question. You know, when we keep on adding things on, I mean, are we talking about? Look, there's the Republican Governors Association is hitting you with an attack ad, accusing you of just.
I hadn't noticed that.
Of adding more and more more and more taxes. I mean, but you said earlier that maybe some programs you just won't get to. When you talk about sort of boosting the economy,
Sure.
Chris Christie fell into the same pitfalls where he had rosy projections, and then he had to scale back, and then we had the deficits. I mean, are you looking to tax increases other than the ones that you've laid out, like the millionaire's tax and taxing marijuana, or do you just have to, if we can't do free college or community college, that goes by the wayside?
Yeah, so a couple of things we sort of have to, again, let's remember the frame of reference here. Number one, I'm proud of the fact that our math is buttoned down. We have sources and uses. Secondly, you can't underestimate how weak the stewardship of this economy has been, particularly through the lens of the middle class. So the very wealthiest among us, the big corporations, and listen, we want people to be here and employing folks, that's it. But let's be fair about this. Hedge funds that are ripping our eyes out for limited returns, the carried interest loophole, I mean, come on, this is stuff that we should have closed a long time ago. So the prospect to grow this economy is real. We're coming from a low place. This is not like if we get there, that we've inherited a state that's been booming for 8 years, and the question is, how do you keep it going? We're that baseball team that's scrapping to get in the playoffs with a very attractive trajectory going up. I'm going to take a shot here, so forgive me, not at you guys, but at my opponent. So I just want to warn you ahead of time here. If I had nothing to run on, I'd run ads talking about me and being a drunken sailor, lefty, lunatic, fringe, progressive liberal too. I mean, come on, you've been there for almost 8 years. You've been right by the governor's side every step of the way. You own the track record. Please talk about what you've done. We'll talk about what we'll do if we get there. But let's have a fair, even-keeled fight. And I kind of laugh at those accusations. I'm proud of the fact we're buttoned down. We are a pay-as-you-go. We're going to get fairness, better priorities, but we're not going to get out over our skis.
And could I follow up on priorities?
Please.
And it's also on the college cost things. Aside from providing scholarships for students, the major problem has been that the state has frozen its aid to higher ed,
Yes.
and that's forced a larger share of the cost to be borne by students. When you talk to fiscal experts on the left and the right about New Jersey's situation, I am not seeing any who say we can do things like increase funding for higher ed unless we cut benefits for public workers. And that one widespread concern about you is that you're close to those public worker unions and are unlikely to push for that. So help us out on that.
So first part, you'll forgive me, I'll be extraordinarily polite about this, but I'm going to disagree with the premise. I don't think you have to do what you've just said in terms of math in order to get things like the core objectives that we have. Secondly, again, you and I have had this conversation over the years. I don't know how, if you've been left at the altar for now going on 20 years, that the first move on the chessboard is, by the way, I've not owned up to my obligation over the past 20 years. In year 21 to come back in and say, listen, I'm not going to own up for it again, but I'm wondering, could you make another concession so that that'll allow me to be in a better place to own up to my side of the bargain? I don't think so. I think we got to stand up and be trusted and do what we said we'd do.
I hear that, and all those experts I talked to on the left and right do say the main problem is the state hasn't coughed up its share.
Yep.
But in recent years, the state has dramatically increased that. Christie's contributed more than any other governor by a significant margin. And how do you deal with the hard math, even if we were complicit in getting here?
Yep.
How do you go, if these benefits are taking 14% of the budget now, and it's growing as the bipartisan commission co-led by Tom Moran, a Democrat.
Yep.
If that 14% grows to 27% in the next 5 years, how can you possibly have money left over for things like transportation, education, preschool, all these dramatic things that this state needs, as you say, to become a more fair and prosperous place?
So this commission, even Governor Christie's commission that Tom was one of the co-chairs or chaired, even they said that the 100% of the reason why we've got a pension hole is the fact the state hasn't stood up on its side, number one. Number two, we will extend and I hope accelerate what the current plan has been. Number three, the 14 going to 27 has very modest expectations for what our state will look like in terms of our growth rate and the size of our budget. X years from now. And I don't think rosy is the word I'd use at all on our side. I actually think we've used more conservative growth projections than the governor, than Governor Christie has. I want to give everyone a sense of what the growth means, because we're talking about this so it's sort of abstract, and I want to put this into more dollars and cents. So if you look at, if I may, if you look at New Jersey economic growth rate from either, and you have to pick a couple of variables here, either since the trough of the recession or over the past 5 years, and compare our growth to either an average American state or an average performance, say, by a peer group of states like New York, Massachusetts,
Our economic growth, or
our economic growth, so the growth of our economy. Good question. Pardon me for not clarifying. If you look at that growth of our economy, you will see that we've left, relative to only average performance, $20 to $50 billion worth of economic activity on the table. $20 to $50 billion. Our folks think that translates into something around $2 to $3 billion of state revenue that we've annually that we've left on the table. That's real money. I mean, that solves a lot of the woes that we're talking. I only wish we had that money, whether it's property tax relief, which you asked about, pension obligations, funding public education or infrastructure, whatever it might be. So I don't want the growth piece of this to be abstract. And I'm also not suggesting you start to grow on Monday and you get all the revenues on Tuesday. I understand some of this, which is why on community college or universal pre-K, you can't. You'd be not telling the truth if you said you'll get to that tomorrow. You got to leg in and pay as you go. And I think we've got a credible plan to do that.
Let's go to another great student question. It better be great. The others are great.
I hope. I'll try. Good evening. My name is Brandon Pugh. I'm an Eagleton Fellow and a school board member in Morristown. So state aid for education is...
Morris or Morris?
Morristown.
I love Morris.
Burlington County.
I know it well.
So state aid for education has...
You may want to get that microphone up a
So
little.
state aid for education has essentially been frozen for 5 years, with the exception of the changes in July. You'd mentioned wanting to fully fund the school funding formula. Where would you find the approximately $1.6 billion that would take? And would you reduce state aid in districts that are currently overfunded to give to those districts that are underfunded?
Got it.
Thank you.
Listen, I had a magical visit. I've been to Morristown a few times, but I had a magical visit. I'm a former national board member of the NAACP, and the Underground Railroad went through Morristown, as you know, and I was in one of the homes that stood beside a barn where they had sort of the back and forth tunnel where folks were going back and forth depending on which of the two buildings were being searched, and it was pretty powerful. Here's how I think about this. We've had one school funding formula in the history of our state, blessed by our Supreme Court. I think it was in 2008, to the best of my recollection. Right. It's a good example of, it's one of many good examples where you used to say, you know what, New Jersey used to do things that was a national model. It's hard to believe this NJ Transit was viewed as a national commuter rail model not that long ago. The Port Authority is a national bi-state model not that long ago. The school funding formula in that same league. Why? And again, you know this, and you're on the board. It went from money-chasing districts to bottoms up, building a formula that had as its guiding principle that not every kid is born with the same set of luck or circumstances. So it asks the questions you need to ask. What's your household look like? How many parents do you have there? What's the first language you speak? Free or reduced lunch as a measure of poverty. Do you have special education needs, et cetera? So built that up. Extraordinarily, I believe, fair way to do it, taking away from the notion of money-chasing districts to money-chasing kids. Fast forward to 2017, all you hear is the school funding formula has failed. That's just not true. It was never funded. So we're going to stand up and say, you know what, maybe it needs to be tweaked and dusted off and updated. It is 9 years later, after all. But we're going to fully fund the school funding formula, and that, by definition, will smooth out a lot of what these inequities appear to be. Our numbers are not as dire as yours, by the way. We believe, and I remember sitting down with the Ed board at the Star Ledger going over this. We think if you take, and I don't want to get too technical, but take sort of $200 to $300 of the hold harmless aid, and you put in another $600 or $700 million, which is the core piece of what we're going to fund, you can get to fully funding the school funding formula. We are absolutely committed to it. The notion that an outstanding public education ought to be available to every kid in the state, no matter what their circumstance, is as precious a notion as we have in New Jersey.
Real quick, Tom. I mean, you've been talking a lot on the campaign about fully funding the formula, but you just mentioned tweaking it. I mean, we're working with a formula right now that wasn't enacted by the legislature as much as it was decreed by the court. Do you support or have a plan to work with the legislature to get legislation to revamp or dust off, or however you say you want to tweak it?
I'm only saying that, Matt, because I assume in nine years on, anything that gets that you revisit is going to need to be tweaked and revamped. So I don't say that knowing that there are 5 things about it that I know we have to revamp. Obviously, I want to work with the legislature to get it in the best place possible. The big issue here is the funding.
Well, my understanding is aside from not fully funding that formula, there's been political meddling that has created winners and losers, and I think that's probably what you're trying to get at, right?
Correct.
If you fix it, Phil, if I may ask,
Yeah.
If you fix this and go by the book, among the biggest losers are Jersey City and Hoboken because they've experienced economic growth. It's not reflected in that. Are you ready to take on Hudson County Democrats?
My view is this. Let's re-embrace the formula. Let's see what it tells us about the realities today. I actually don't know to the penny what it looks like in Jersey City if you did that, or Hoboken. But I believe with all my heart, if we stick to the principle of a bottom-up notion, and that's how we're going to do it, we're going to ask the questions at the kid level, we'll get the right answers.
But you're going to stick with the existing formula. So.
I will, although I wanted to just say, just because I just want to say it's 9 years on. I'm just making a common sense observation. There may be some of that needs to be updated.
Okay. We have another student question.
Hi.
Madam?
Good evening. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Samantha Booth. I'm a student here, but I'm from Delray, New Jersey, so right next door to Morristown.
Right next door to Morristown.
Yeah.
Nice to have you.
Thank you. So my question's
Nice to have you. You're having me, by the way.
My question's in regards to the future of DACA. If President Trump moves to deport the Dreamers who came to this country legally as children, what would you do as governor?
Yeah, this is you wake up every day thinking that you've got what you're going to focus on in New Jersey, and then you get these out of left field things. You know, I wasn't expecting to be talking about the NFL a few days ago, or North Korea a couple of weeks ago, or LGBT in the military. It's just extraordinary, and Dreamers is high on that list. So I got to roll the tape back. I hope. Are we okay on time here? I don't want to overstay my welcome. So roll the tape back and say, long before I thought Trump would be, or as my wife would say, he who shall not be named was going to be elected president. We had stood pretty strongly for many years for things like statewide identification cards for everybody, regardless of status. We think that's a smart public policy. Access to driver's license for everybody, regardless of status, assuming they pass the test, obviously. And access to not just in-state tuition, but in-state financial aid for Dreamers. So the good news is they got access to in-state tuition, but not to the financial aid, which I think is wrong. And then along comes this president. So we still stand for all those things, but we've had to get into more of a defensive crouch, defensive posture. And so we're now dealing with questions: would you be, sanctuary cities, sanctuary states? This one really gets me deeply. You know, you've got 22,000 Dreamers in this state. They pay $60-something million in taxes, contribute about $1.6 billion, as I recall, to economic activity. 91 or 90-something% are either in school or working. They're every bit as American as my 4 kids. So this one really offends me. And so yet they're being shown the door. So it's one of many data points. Unfortunately, it's one of many where we've said, you know what, governors will have never mattered more. Not just in the where's the governing going to get done. I think a lot more likely at state and local levels than in Washington, based on the evidence of late. But also, we're going to need a governor who's prepared to stand up with a steel backbone and say, you know what, you will not use our state and local police to unlawfully frisk Dreamers or use DACA data against them, or just walk up to residents and threaten to deport them or break up their families. So we're going to stand tall. You're also going to need an attorney general with a steel backbone and a willingness and a preparedness to exhaust all legal means. And by the way, you're seeing that from lots of states, including red states. This is not a Democratic-Republican thing. You see a lot of, my high school, you can't make this up, my high school classmate and college classmate is the governor of Massachusetts, Charlie Baker. He's a Republican, he's a good guy. I don't agree with him on everything. He has stood up. He's one of many examples. You don't have to be a Democrat to stand up for young Americans. This is as American as you get. So I'm disappointed that our governor and lieutenant governor haven't, again, I wish you could ask this question of her, why they're not locking arms with other states and saying this is wrong. This is wrong. Now, I hope there is a sensible solution coming at us out of Washington. I hope there's some, whether it's health care or immigration or tax policy. I hope, please God, there's some bipartisan cooperation, but we're going to do what it takes. And if that's the fullest extent of the law, if that's whatever it might be, we're going to stand up on behalf of Dreamers in the state.
Yeah, just heard a NPR story driving here about how farmers can't find workers, and I look at Newark and imagine what the city would be like without immigration, the city's economy. It's just, I'm an editorial writer. It comes naturally. I have to sneak that in. So on the sanctuary city, so I wanted to ask you about, as I'm sure many of us remember that horrible day when 4 college kids in Newark were shot in a schoolyard, execution style. One of the people convicted of that murder, Jose Carranza, was an undocumented immigrant from Peru. It turned out he had been arrested the year before for child rape and released on bail. Ann Milgram, the Attorney General at the time, issued a new directive so that currently in New Jersey, if you are arrested for a felony or drunk driving, our police are supposed to notify the federal government of that, the immigration authorities. In many sanctuary cities, they won't notify them until there is a conviction, and drunk driving is or is not included. I wonder what you think about the current state of the law. As I say, it's any felony or drunk driving, and it's at the point of arrest, not at the point of conviction.
Well, I want to be honest with everybody. When I've got an answer, I'm going to give it to you. This is the first time I've ever been asked it. I think the context for me, Tom, would be the field is so tilted against Dreamers, against newly arrived immigrant brothers and sisters. My bias is going to be having their back, because there's always going to be an example in any population of somebody who does something awful or whatever it is, in this case at a heinous level, and I'm not denying that. But then we got to be careful not to extrapolate that and then throw a similar blanket over an entire group of folks. So I feel like the field has been so tilted against these folks. I want to be the guy they feel like they can rely on. I have to think that through in terms of the point of notification. One of the things we have said that we would establish immediately, and this admittedly doesn't get at this, but it's in the same neighborhood, is an Office of Immigrant Protection at the state level. Because one of the things going around the state, the minute all this Muslim ban came up, I went to Newark Liberty and met with lawyers. We had Senator Booker and I at a round table the next day. We then did a separate thing with Dreamers. One of the things you realize, particularly depending on your status, is you don't know who to call. Mm-hmm. Or you hear 10 different things and you're not sure which one to believe. And so that's one thing I wanted to say. We want to basically clarify that to make sure there was one place, probably more legal services than anything else, where folks could get answers regardless of their status and without any recrimination. But on this one, I'd like to come back to you. I'm not sure what the right point of notification is, but my bias going into this is that we've got a whole group of folks here who we've got the boot on their neck, and that doesn't feel right to me. That's un-American.
Do we have another student question, or is that it? 2 more. Okay.
Hi, I just wanted to thank you first for coming, Ambassador Murphy.
My honor.
All right, so my name is Jonathan Kratchman, and I am from Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And my question...
Not that far from you all.
So my question for you tonight is that I am someone that an insurance company would label as a person with a pre-existing condition.
God bless you.
So what would you do to make sure there's a quality of care for all of New Jerseyans without anybody having the rug pulled beneath them?
God bless you, Jonathan. So this is a big one. I mean, I think we had, Jonathan, I think you personally and we collectively had a big day yesterday. But as we've said all too often, we've thought we've had big days before over the past several months, only to have to come back and re-litigate the same battles on health care. I start with a premise that health care is a right, not a privilege. I served as the United States ambassador in Germany, where that lefty, lunatic, fringe player Bismarck brought universal health care to Germany. So this is hardly again, it's not a left, we've made it a left-right ideological thing. It's smart government. It's good for individuals like yourself. It's good for society. So that's my starting point. The Affordable Care Act is imperfect. This just in, it's imperfect. Barack Obama, for whom I've worked, said as recently as 2 days ago in a speech that he thinks it's imperfect. But we're halfway up the mountain, and it's had an enormous impact in this state. I think you guys know this well, but for everybody's benefit, a couple of just data points that you have to, 800,000 people in this state have health care, most of whom didn't have it for the first time in their lives. 3+ million people, Jonathan, like you, with pre-existing conditions who wouldn't otherwise have insurance. Tens of thousands of young people who are on their parents' plans until they're 26. Women's access to contraception, seniors' access to life-saving drugs, double-digit thousands of jobs created at a time when we desperately need jobs. So I'll accept this ain't perfect. It isn't. But let's keep an eye on the horizon, which is healthcare is a right, not a privilege. Let's hold the gains we've made. Thank God we dodged another bullet yesterday. And let's try to chip away. Let's have all the options on the table. Let's try to chip away at how we get from here to there. If that had gone the other way yesterday, I was told by somebody last night an annual hit of $3.9 billion. Never mind the devastation it would do to individuals like yourself. So we got to do all that we can to defend what we've got and then work together to make it as good as we can toward that universal objective.
I guess, and this for me comes back to almost a dollar and cents too. I don't think that this issue on the national level is going to go away. They can still change the rules after the end of this month when it comes to pushing through health care. You mentioned the 800,000 in New Jersey who have health care for the first time. That's because Governor Chris Christie expanded Medicaid, one of the few Republican governors to do it. So yeah, we would be losing billions.
To his credit, by the way.
Sure, but we would be losing billions of dollars if that rug is pulled from the state. When we come to sanctuary cities, that will get tied up into the court, but the federal government has promised to try to withhold federal funding for states that do that. And I know that will be a court issue, but then there's other, again, with recreational marijuana, it's against federal law. Yep. So for me, there's a point of this where it comes back, and your opponent has similar issues where it's kind of promising more that isn't exactly there, and that is kind of on rosy projections. But how? I mean, this is now a long list of things that are up in the billions.
Matt, don't get mad at me. I'm going to argue with the premise of your question, and I want to talk about my opponent. Promising rosy things when you've been in the seat sitting beside the governor for going on 2,800 days is an oxymoron. She's been there. Where's the beef? Listen, these are all individual challenges. One thing, I'm listening to your question, one thing that convinces me, not only do we have to win an election in 2017, we got to pivot to 2018 and change the nature of the representation that this state has and this country has in Washington. We can't keep having these moments. I mean, Jonathan, I'm not going to speak for you, but I don't know how you feel when you're coming up and you're relying on John McCain, who I know and I have a lot of regard for as an American hero, but how does he come out on that given day on that issue? That's no way to run the Navy. That's no pun intended. No way to run the country. We got to have we have to get to a better place. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, so I admit that. I don't know one qualified lawyer I've spoken to, and someone will probably raise their hand right now and say, sure, I'm one of those guys, who believes this threat on withholding federal money if you're a sanctuary state or city has merit. So I'm just going to say that, and again, I'm not a lawyer, so let me just say that those are conversations I've had. We're gonna push back, and listen, if the healthcare thing went the wrong way, we're in a heap of trouble. So that's not a rosy projection. That would be a catastrophe for us. When the federal government pulls out, when you go to block grants in Medicaid, then you start having to make decisions. You get it and you don't. That's not America. That's not where we should be headed. I'm not trying to make light of that. I'm trying to be as realistic as possible.
I want to squeeze in a short discussion on charter schools, which I personally regard as one of the great successes in New Jersey, especially in Camden and Newark over the last decade. We just yesterday got new results from the uncommon schools in Camden that were absolutely remarkable. And as you know, these schools are not based on who wants to join. They're based on the neighborhood. They just had the charter organizations take over the local school, basically. So you can't cream the best students and cheat that way. Remarkable results. In Newark, similar. And African-American families, as you know, in Newark have consistently chosen charters above the traditional school when they have the chance. You've called for a moratorium or a pause. I want you to talk about that.
Yep. Again, I'm going to answer the question, Tom, and you and I have talked about this before. This is a little bit like the 2% cap and the 50%. The big gorilla item here is underfunding public education. Charters are public education, district schools, magnet schools, community schools are public. And so let's just remember that funding public education overwhelms a lot of the other issues that we're dealing with.
But the charters have less money, as you know.
Well, they take 90 cents on the dollar, and so here's
no capital.
Here's my my hope. And by the way, if we get elected, I'm hoping to quote unquote have the timeout before we get there. We've been meeting with all sides in this for the past couple of years, so it's not like we're waiting. But there were a series. First of all, you made a very good point, and you didn't finish. Well, I'm gonna put words in your mouth, but I suspect we might agree. The reality. First of all, this debate is way over-labeled. You get passionate around this word or that word: district, charter, magnet, community. He said, she said. You get balkanized, very emotional. You know this, right? It's a different dynamic in a Newark and Camden than it is in a Montclair where you are, or Red Bank where I am. And that's one point people have to, I think, I've certainly concluded, or in Princeton where they had a big debate. I want to make sure we're all playing with the same set of facts. I've never been a hell no charter guy. And it's a very, not black and white, it's a very gray area. For instance, NJEA is organized, I think, in 19 charters in the state, to pick an example. So you might think, well, you'd have a big union over here and charters. In fact, that's even muddled. But I want to go through and make sure, Daniel Patrick Moynihan had this great line, we're all entitled to our own opinion, we're not entitled to our own facts. Let's get and this is one where everyone brings their own facts to the table. I've never seen anything like it. Let's have one set of facts. Let's have, whether it's funding, as you pointed out, governance, both when they come in and how they're governed once you have them, teacher standards, evaluations of the schools, testing, whatever it might be. If on a level playing field, same set of facts, it's a high-performing school, count me in as a supporter, whether it's a charter, district, community, magnet, whatever you want to call it.
Is there a fact about the charters in Camden that gives you pause?
Is there a fact?
I mean, a fact that came from the other side. The critics say the NJEA.
No, not necessarily. I mean, you've got the Renaissance schools in Camden, which is another wrinkle. Right. And I've visited all shapes and sizes, charters, districts, communities, and Renaissance. I don't think I've been in a magnet school in Camden, but I was just making the point that I think the inner city reality is a different. For instance, Red Bank, where I'm in Monmouth County. Red Bank is across. I'm in Middletown, across the river. They've got a charter. They wanted to expand it. Local input is another thing that gets people, enraged on both sides. Either you don't want it or you do want it. They wanted to expand that charter, or a second charter, I can't recall. But the demographics there were not what they are, for instance, in Newark. There was a big skewing of, for instance, the Latino kid population. So it also depends on the community you're in.
If you impose a moratorium on their growth or a pause on that growth, would you consider exempting districts where there is clearly a need for alternatives like Newark and Camden?
I think you deal with the community, whether, I'm not sure I'd use the word exemption, but I would, the good news is the school years are already started. Mm-hmm. So if we're fortunate enough to get there, we may have a window where you can actually get this solved without having to worry about the enrollment period coming in. So if you and I were having this conversation in June or April even, it might be a different ballgame.
Okay. It is fair to say that's your goal, is to not disrupt the natural growth of these schools. As you know, they grow fifth graders, then they'll expand to sixth grade.
Yeah, as long as they're based on a commonly accepted set of facts that they're doing well, and that's, I want to make sure we get a level playing field of facts, but yes.
Okay. We are, sorry to say, about out of time, but this was a great discussion, and again, the man has a giant lead, and I think deserves some credit for showing up and taking this tooth drilling.
I love the dentist, Tom.
Tom will let you take one more free shot at Kim.
Yeah, go ahead. What do you think about her hairdo? No, I'd just like to thank you for coming again, and thank everybody for participating, especially you students. Those are great questions.
The best.
And
the best.
Go democracy.
Amen. Thank you, everybody.